All right, you guys, welcome to the big garden on the 31st of August. It's about 7:30 in the morning, and I always forget to mention I'm in southeast Washington, and the eastern part of Washington is quite dry. We get less than 20 inches of rain a year. 20 inches is considered the agricultural standard for crops that you might not have to irrigate, and so we are under that, which means this entire garden is on a drip irrigation system. We have had about less than an inch of rain since mid-April, so we definitely rely on irrigation. Let's go see how things have progressed. And I did, for a change, actually mow before I'm shooting this video instead of afterwards, which is lovely. So this is our sorghum row, and this is a double row that's 100 feet long. One row was planted slightly later than the other. And we've got another month and a half, so hopefully we're gonna get something out of this. Sorghum is ready. It sends up a stalk at the top, and when that stalk, the seeds of that stalk are in what's called milk stage, it is ready to harvest. If you wait too long to harvest it and you've had a frost, the plant will produce something that turns into cyanide, and so it's really critical that you harvest sorghum before you get a frost. So we'll see what we get here. These 3 rows were garlic, and all of that garlic was harvested around before the 1st of July, I think, or close to that. And it's all in storage drying. And what I've done here is I've put in, there's a few things at the end of the row where I had some extra room that just got thrown in the ground because I had extra. So there's marigold here, there's a really lovely Rudbeckia. And then these are a couple of very aphid-eaten collards that I've just been leaving. I have some Swiss chard here that was just extra. That looks pretty good, actually, finally. It's kind of struggled through the spring, but it's now looking pretty decent. And then my fall crop of cabbage, broccoli, cauliflower is in here. So this is cabbage. And these were started from seed around the 1st of July. Yeah, probably a little later than that, probably the 15th of July, and then grown out. And then these have been in the ground now for a couple weeks. And I need to get in here and spray. They are also getting aphids, just because that's the time of year when aphid pressure is really heavy. And then this is cauliflower. I do not have good luck growing cauliflower here in the spring. It gets too hot, too fast, and they do not do well. And so I have found that what works well for me is a short days to maturity cauliflower that I plant in the fall. And so this, again, all got planted from seed early July and then planted out a couple weeks ago. There's also a little bit of broccoli in here as well, so a fall crop of broccoli. I have a lot of slug issues, and one of the problems is that the slugs will, they're not big enough to destroy the plant, but they will scrape the stem of the plant right at the soil line and basically ring it, kind of like you would ring a tree, and that will cause the plant to stunt and not grow well. You can see, can't get too close or my camera won't focus, but you can see a little bit of it here where this stem is slightly discolored. That's probably from slugs. I've got some weed issues in here too where I'm going to need to do some weeding. I do put down slug bait when I first plant these, but it's very hard to keep up with it constantly. And usually that once they get to a certain size, they've outgrown the slugs and they'll be fine. But there's this window where they are quite fragile. And then the entire rest of this row, let me come down to the other end where you can see it without my shadow in the picture. The rest of these 3 rows is now in a cover crop. And the idea of a cover crop or a green manure is that you plant something that's going to be great for pollinators, it's going to feed the soil, and then it just gets tilled in at the end of the season, or you let it winter kill from the frost of winter. And then those soils decompose, or those roots decompose in the soil And so it's a way of feeding your soil and not leaving it uncovered. So this is a mix of a bunch of different things, and I've bought various cover crops over the years, and they've kind of gotten mixed together. So there's a bunch of different stuff in here. Peaceful Valley Organics has really great cover crops, and you can buy individual components or you can buy mixes, and they base those mixes on what your climate is and what your rainfall is and what time of year it is. So they have really good deep dive information on all of this if it's something you decide you want to do. But we clearly have got peas in here, and these are not like good eating peas, they're field peas. I believe I have some triticale in here. This very frilly stuff, this is vetch, which is a type of pea, and as well, and so this is going to help fix nitrogen and put it in the soil. I have a few weeds in here, like that's a weed. This is purslane, which is a weed. And so I'm getting some weeds in here as well, but mostly I plant this cover crop pretty densely, and so it will generally outcompete most of the weeds that are in here. So yeah, cover crop is always what I put in after my garlic comes out at the end of the year. So that's always fun. The very, very weedy row of perennials. I've got some horseradish in there that's just buried. This is anise hyssop, which is lovely. And I should come out and do a big harvest on that. That's a perennial, but it's very short-lived. And so I find that it doesn't do a whole lot. Tons and tons of weeds that I've just ignored. This is rhubarb, also a perennial, and I just let it do its thing this time of year. And then I have a bunch of Jerusalem artichokes in here, or sunchokes. And some years I harvest them, some years I don't. They will flower, but not until quite late. And so we're not there yet. They're a perennial sunflower, and they have a tuber in the ground that you can eat. It's really good if you're diabetic, but it can also make you very gassy. So it's a little tricky to deal with. And a lot of times I just leave these in the ground. They're kind of an emergency food source. And you can see there's more of them. There's another patch. Originally, most of this row was Jerusalem artichokes, and believe it or not, the gophers have eaten enough of it that I don't have nearly as much in here as I used to. There's also obviously things like, this is catnip that's just reseeded all over the farm. I have regular sunflowers that have reseeded in here. So it's not all undesirables. There is some oregano in here, and there's a few other things that have just gotten completely buried. Look at our lovely morning glories. I know people hate these because they can become quite invasive, but I just love seeing them in this tangled mess. This little pop of blue. I think they're so pretty. So a little more, I like a little chaos in my garden. They say that good teachers plan and then let go. And I really think that's true of good gardeners as well. You plan it all out, but there's a point where you just let go and let nature do what it's going to do and admire her beauty. All right. These 3 rows are onion, or were onion. A lot of them are out at this point. So I've got onions here, and then the second half of this row is leeks. All of this right here is cilantro that I have purposely let go to seed because it is fantastic for pollinators. You get out here when it's warm and everything is moving in here. And I also really just absolutely adore the flowers of cilantro. It's like they're little fairy flowers. They're so sweet and so delicate and so, so lovely. And then, of course, you can see some of it starting to happen here. Ultimately, these will go to seed, and that seed is harvestable as coriander. And I use coriander in my chili mixes, and so this is ultimately just going to be harvestable coriander. Sorry, my neighbor is doing a ton of construction right now. So the onions are about done. I've harvested about half of them. Here's an example. This one is just done and out of the ground. So this is Tropea, and I showed you guys in my other video where I'm storing these as they dry. I try to grow 100 storage onions a year for my own use, and then I sell the small storage onions and the Cipollini and Tropea heritage onions every fall. And so you can see there's a lot of flopped over heads here. That's how you know they're ready to harvest. And then they need to dry until that top is completely dry. We still have a few of the flowers that I planted between the varieties so that I know where the variety changes that are just going great guns. This is called Persian Carpet zinnia, and it's a small little zinnia. It stays fairly compact, and this has been blooming for 3 months. It's just amazing. Oh, we have a sleepy bee. Can you see that big old bee in there? I love it. This was a volunteer. I grew these last year, and this was a volunteer that came up in here. So I didn't actually plant that. I think. I'm not 100% sure because I did have a bunch of different varieties in this row. But I love that there's still some things blooming in the garden. This was originally a zinnia, and it just completely disappeared, and I had a volunteer tomatillo, and so I threw the tomatillo in there instead to mark where the variety changed, and it's huge. The tomatillos are not huge size-wise. You can see this is typically what most of them are doing, so they're pretty little, probably because it came from a hybrid variety of tomatillo and it's reverting back to more of its wild form. But there are a ton of tomatillos on there, so I've been harvesting that, and it's been a little bit late because it was smaller than the ones I started from seed in the greenhouse. This is a volunteer. This is Nicotina. It smells absolutely amazing, and it usually blooms when it's not full sun, so it'll bloom in the evening. It's a really nice thing to put next to a bedroom window. It has tiny little seeds, and it will reseed, and so I've grown it on purpose, and then it's just randomly reseeded out here, and if it's not in a bad place, I just leave it. This is all Tulsi, and this is also just all reseeded from last year. And so I had Tulsi in here last year. There's still a few onions in here as well, but mostly I've been letting the Tulsi do its thing. Here's another, this is a volunteer ground cherry. It's another thing you will always have and never be without. And then at the very end of this row are some extra peppers. And so this pepper variety is called Aleppo, and it comes from Syria. And it's difficult to get seeds for this in the US. I ordered these off of Amazon. Oops, I guess we're just gonna take that one in. They typically have this kind of 3-lobed blunt bottom on them and then very wrinkly looking. So this is typically what they look like. They are normally dried and flaked and used as a dried flake or a dried powder. I've been growing and saving seeds from this variety for probably 5 or 6 years. And so these were just some extra that I had. A gorgeous marigold that is still going strong. And then this did have volunteer potatoes in amongst these rosemary, and I did finally harvest the potatoes. It was a surprisingly good harvest for potatoes that volunteered that I didn't actually plant. And so now these rosemary are finally getting enough light and enough sun that I should be able to do a big harvest off of them right at the end of the season. Rosemary for us here is not typically perennial in our climate. Sometimes it will overwinter, but usually not. And so the ones that are out in the garden like this, I literally just cut them off at the base and dry the entire thing. Another little marigold. I've been saving seeds from this variety for a couple of years. I love that it's starting to throw a little bit of yellow in there among the red. Very pretty. And then let's go down and look at the leeks and how the leeks are progressing. The water is on in this area right now. Leeks are long game, so they take a long time to mature. They're not a short, quick process. But you can see, like, there's a really nice one back in there. So that one's getting to a really nice size. They hold in the ground quite well.
Here we go. Yeah, there's some good ones in there. They hold quite a while in the ground, and depending on the variety and how severe your winters are, sometimes you can overwinter them. But yeah, these are coming along quite nicely. I typically harvest these late September, so I leave them for quite a while. And initially I will harvest the fattest ones, leave the smaller ones in the ground, and then do a final harvest of the smallest ones right before we get a hard frost. I had extra plants. I did 2 plantings on these because I didn't have great germination on the first batch of leeks. And so there is a second row of small batch of leeks that are tucked in here. But I had originally planted cilantro before we put the leeks in. So they're getting a little bit buried. They're not super happy. But leeks are coming. I'm just going to jump right over the top of this row. So this is the melon row, and it goes all the way down here to the end. These are planted about every 5 feet. We do have one here that is, most of these have been much larger than this, and they are done. So there was a window of about 2 weeks where I was literally harvesting melons out of here every single day. Mostly Hannah's Choice, which is a cantaloupe that I love. I like melons that slip, where they let go of the stem when they're ripe. You can see there's one very late one tucked into there. So there's a few still out here. But my experience with the late season ones is they don't taste nearly as good as the ones that came in during the height of the temperature or of the summer. There's cardboard in between each one of these plants, which is actually impossible to even tell right now because the weeds have gotten so bad. But I was able to get a nice crop out of here before the weeds got impossible. And the reason they're so tall, the weeds are so tall on the sides, is because there comes a point where I can't mow the edges of this bed without mowing off the tendrils on the ends of the melon plants. And I don't want to do that and introduce a bunch of disease. And so I just let them go. And then we are at the point now, we're getting ready to go on a small vacation, but when we get back, I will pull the drip line out of here and just mow this entire thing down and then till it under. And this probably will be where some of the garlic goes for next year. So we're about ready to flip this bed. There's one more tucked in there. But these really late season ones, I often don't just eat them out of hand. Ooh. So, there he goes. There's another one of those Nicotinas, and there was a really pretty little metallic fly on there. And then there's also a little hoverfly or a bee in there. So a little chaos happening at the end here. The corn row is finished. There are a few stragglers in here, but we did harvest what we could. This was I abandoned this corn 2 months ago because I knew that it wasn't going to be terribly successful. I didn't have it planted thick enough for it to get good pollination. And let me show you what this looks like and why I'm just leaving what's left out here. Side note, a lot of people will tell you when to pick corn, and they talk about when the top of the silks are completely brown. My silks get eaten off, and I don't know what's eating them off, if it's grasshoppers or something else, but I can't tell ripeness on my corn by the silks because the silks are getting eaten. So this isn't a good example because it's really almost completely unpollinated. But see how there's one kernel right there? There's one kernel right there. Everything else on this cob never got pollinated. And that's because it was just too far apart from its neighbors for it to be mature or to get pollinated. They need to be in close proximity to each other to get complete pollination. This is the 2 kernels that are on here are actually over mature, like they're fully done. And pretty starchy. So yeah, whatever's left out here, we just left it because we knew there wasn't enough in there to bother with. We did get some harvest though. We got probably 10 ears that were big enough and full enough that we could actually just have fresh corn, which was lovely. And then we got a bunch of partial ears. Guess who's decided that the corn cob is tasty? You gonna eat that, Charlie? Is that yummy? Yeah, you can have that. We did get a bunch of partial ears that I just blanched and cut the corn off the cob. And we did some nice corn salad, and I froze probably a couple of pounds. So it wasn't a total failure, but it was definitely not what we had hoped for. This is the bean row. And I've got a bunch of different varieties of beans in here. The very beginning of this row is edamame. And honestly, I think I probably missed my window on these. They're probably too mature to harvest at this point. I did harvest quite a bit off of the other edamame that was in my raised bed garden. But these guys, I didn't get great germination on these. And so I've just kind of almost been ignoring them, which is too bad. I missed my window on that. But lots and lots and lots of beans in here. These don't look like much from the top. But when you get down in here and look, there's quite a few beans in here. I think these are cannellini on this end. I can't remember. Sometimes it's a surprise when I harvest them, but they're not quite ready yet. They're gonna need a little bit longer. These got planted a little bit later. Oh wait, I do know what those are. Those are orca, or yin yang beans. They got put in later than everything else. Most of this is black bean. And so I was running low on black beans, and so I decided I was going to plant a lot of them this year. And again, doesn't look like anything from the top. And then you get down in here and look, and there's lots and lots of beans in here. Some of these are almost ready. Let me see if I can find one and crack it open and show you. So there's what we're starting to get here. And so there'll be tons of dried black beans coming out of here. And then on through to the end. So lots of beans coming. It's always I mostly plant it, I weed it once or twice, and then I just ignore it until it's harvest season, which is late September, early October. So these are coming along. I like how hands-off they are. This is, if you've never seen this before, borage. So this is borage, and this is another one that just volunteers and pops up here and there, and if it's not in the wrong spot, I just leave it. So quite lovely. I do have some snapdragons tossed in here and there out there, most of which have been harvested. This is our giant, unruly, at this point, sunflower row. I leave this in the middle of my garden on purpose because it attracts and feeds all kinds of pollinators and birds. And attracting the birds helps the birds come in and eat lots and lots of insects. And so this is always in the middle, and I don't generally plant this. I just let it reseed, although I will sometimes replant it every 3 or 4 years. So lots of sunflowers in there that at this point are flopping over. It's become quite the unruly mess, but that's okay. It happens every year, and I just chop them off when they're in the way. This is what's left of our broccoli from the spring, and I should have pulled these plants. I had quite a bit of harvest in here that I could have taken and didn't, just because I was way too busy with other things. And so, like that's a head right there that I could probably still harvest, but I froze lots of broccoli. I am broccoli witch. I don't need a ton of it. I might pull some of that for our vacation, just because it's probably going through the heat of the summer. It's not going to be super tasty. And then this is what it looks like as it starts to flower. Broccoli is flower buds. What you're eating on a broccoli plant is the flower buds. And so here's when it's starting to stretch out and try to go to seed or try to flower. And then this is what it looks like when it actually has gone to flower. And to some extent, I've just left this because, again, pollinators love mustard family plants. And you can, I don't know if you can see that in there, but those are just covered in aphids. And so there's tons of aphids in there. And so I need to just pull everything in here and compost it. And I just haven't had time to get to it. But it's not hurting anything, and having it go to flower is feeding some pollinators. Something to know about aphids: there isn't one kind of aphid. There's actually many, 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 many kinds of aphids, and many of them specialize on specific varieties of plant. And so generally, just because my broccoli is loaded with aphids right now does not mean that those aphids are going to spread to other parts of my garden, because they're an aphid that specializes on brassicas. This is where we had that long season 100-day cabbage, and those have all now been harvested, and they're quite lovely, and they made it through the summer with absolutely no issue, which was kind of amazing. So I'm kind of pleased with that variety. I'll probably grow it again. This is my experiment of quinoa, and so this is what quinoa looks like when it's growing. The plant looks almost identical to lamb's quarter, and it is the same genus, just a different species. And so it's been really interesting to grow this and try to remember to not pull it out of the ground, because it looks almost exactly like lamb's quarter. But yeah, I think we're gonna get some actual seed on this because it's got another month before it needs to come out of the ground. So that's kind of exciting. I only have 4 primary plants here. There's a couple of really small ones that didn't do much. But this was a very late season plant because I completely forgot I had the seed until the very last minute. This was the Chinese sprouting broccoli or cutting broccoli. And this one, you know, this was done 3 months ago and I've just let it do its thing. So it is gloriously blooming right now. And this is what the seed pods on this look like. So mustards, the seed on mustard is called a salique. And I don't find with these, this is a hybrid, and so these seeds are probably not terribly viable. Let's see if I can get this open. But so there's actual seed. And so yeah, if you leave stuff long enough, you end up with seed that you can collect for next year. Again, this is a hybrid variety, and so probably would not come true. And so I'm not gonna bother collecting seeds on that, but that's what a mustard seed looks like in the mustard family. Oh, there's an aphid. He's probably in there eating some aphids, which good for you, girlfriend. The rest of this row is just flowers, and this is one of my very favorites. Look at that snapdragon. I mean, come on. I am a sucker for anything in a lavender color, and that has been so pretty in there. And then basil that has gone to seed. And so this is pretty much done, but still smells lovely and is feeding lots of pollinators. This is a salvia that I threw in here, and it's supposed to be blue, so I'm not sure why it's coming in white, but for whatever reason, it really likes being with this basil. This is by far the biggest salvia of all of the ones that I grew. It's very happy in there. And again, more calendula, a little more salvia, lots more sunflowers down in that part of the world. This entire row, with the exception of a few flowers that I threw into odd spaces and some random green onions, was potatoes. And we've just finished harvesting all of the potatoes last weekend. I had the best potato season that I've ever had. It was amazing. And so I'm gonna do basically a potato unboxing video where I show you us digging the potatoes and give you my tips for what I did differently this year that I think really increased my potato harvest. I do have a few green onions left in here that I need to come along and just pull. They were a little bit smaller when I was harvesting the rest, and so I hadn't gotten around to it yet, and I need to get those out of the ground. Here's a potato that we missed. This variety is called Pinto because it's actually red and white, and it's got a little bit of green on it, so not all that great for eating. I grew tons of hollyhocks this year. None of them bloomed, so all of my hollyhocks in my climate are going to be biannual, which means they would bloom next year. I'm not sure if they're going to stay, simply because I'm going to need to till this row and not leave these in the ground for next year, which is really disappointing because I was super excited to have hollyhocks this year. And I've got some very big plants, but they are not blooming, so bummer on that. I need to put that bed someplace where I don't have to flip the bed. The next 2 rows are all peppers. I'm not going to go through this in great detail. I'll probably do a separate video specifically on peppers And I went through, I think, every variety I had in here in the July video. So if you're really curious about that, you can check that out. But lots of different harvests coming out of here, including some varieties that were new to me this year, including a Calabrian pepper called Dog Nose, and also a Berber pepper that I'm going to use in an Ethiopian Berber spice mix. What you see in here is the Anaheims. So this is the Hatch Anaheim style pepper, and they're starting to get ripe. And so all peppers turn color. Green is an unripe pepper, regardless of the type of pepper that you have. Some peppers will turn red, some turn orange, some turn yellow, but they will all turn color when ripe. And when they're ripe, the flavor is increased, the nutrition is increased, the sweetness is increased. And so I'm a big fan of harvesting ripe peppers rather than green peppers. This is the Berber, and let me see if I can find one. We just picked this the other day, so there's not a ton of stuff in here. Here's one. So that's what this looks like when it's ripe. It is a kind of brick red color. It doesn't get very bright. And that's actually one of the things that Berber Spice Mix is known for, is that kind of deep brown red color. And so these have been really fun. I'm excited to work with these in my spice mixes. Most of the Cosmos that was in here have pretty much conked out. And I won't plant Cosmos as an in-between plant again next year because they just got way too big. I need something that's more compact. They took up way too much room. But we still have a few that are still trying to go. And this was Double Click Cranberry Cosmos. You can see this one is just completely done. And this one, I think, yeah, we accidentally lost the base on that one, so that one's completely done. I've come in the house, I can't tell you how many times, and had these in my pockets, stuck in my socks, in my hair. And so that's how you get more volunteers, is just letting things go to seed. And here's what this looks like when it's happy. And it hasn't died yet, so very pretty. I've really enjoyed this, but way too big of a plant for where I put it. So I need to rethink that next year and not do that again. Okay, let's come around and look at, here's some more anise hyssop that I need to harvest, but very pretty. And then I need to get in here and do this dill as well. I'm specifically harvesting this dill for seed. Let's come around and look at that. That's really pretty. So yeah, look at the beautiful heads of dill seed on there. If you are pickling and you can't find fresh dill, there is no reason that you can't just use dill seed. It works perfectly well. You do not have to have fresh dill in order to make pickles. So yeah, absolutely. It's always worth it to me to have just dill seed on hand. So the goldfinches come every year and eat the sunflowers, and they call back and forth to each other. And there's something about being in the fall garden and hearing my little friends, the goldfinches, talking to each other in the sunflowers that just makes my heart glad every year. I'm gonna go a little bit closer to the sunflowers and see if I can get some birds on video without scaring them completely off. I like seeing them hang halfway upside down to get to the seeds. It's really fun. This is the cucumber trellis. Oh, I accidentally snapped that when I was doing something the other day. This is the Japanese variety that just gets absolutely huge. This never gets bitter. It's a great productive variety. It produces right through the middle of the summer heat. So absolutely fantastic. It is most definitely one of my favorite cucumbers. And you can see the plants look great. They're still healthy. Let's see, I saw another big one in here. And we don't eat a ton of cucumbers, but we do eat some. We love them with a quick pickle on Asian food. And then I have a next door neighbor who helps me out with feeding animals on occasion, and she is a huge pickle eater. She will eat them just like an apple. There's another one down in there. And so I basically keep her supplied in pickles all season, which is fun. This is lemon cucumber. Oops, there's one I missed. And these are called lemon cucumber because of the color, not because they taste like lemons. This is a little bit too big. They're better when they are fully green and don't have any yellow on them. And this plant has been slow, but it's going to hit its stride now that our weather is going to cool off a little bit. So yeah, I need to get in here and pick some of these. But like, that's perfect. This is the ideal size, ideal color and flavor. You want them a little bit smaller. The Kajari melons that I had on both sides of this trellis, one on either arch, have completely died. So they do not like my climate. I'm not sure why. I did get one ripe one, and I didn't love it. And so I won't be growing those again. I know they're often popular. This is the mate to that other snapdragon that I showed you. I mean, come on. I think it was berry blend or something like that, but just absolutely gorgeous. I love these. And then this one is a different variety of snap. That is a snapdragon, but a different type altogether. It's either Chantilly lace or butterfly. I can't remember which, but love those. Gorgeous, very fun to have. This is a patch of cilantro that is done blooming and is ready to harvest. And so this gives you an idea of what those seeds look like when they're ready. These aren't particularly fat, but they are ready to harvest, and I'll probably do a video on how I harvest, dry, and sift coriander seed, because it is quite the job to work through that. There's some good stuff right in there. Tomatillos, this is the tomatillos that I planted. This plant is dying. I suspect that there is a gopher that has gone after the roots of this, because there's no other reason why that should be conking out like it is, but we've just been leaving it. And then I have two healthy plants, or semi-healthy plants. They're kind of coming to the end of the season. Two different varieties. So these two are the same. These two are the same. And it's interesting that I've had one of each kind that have kind of conked out. But there's still some very nice and good sized fruit coming out of here. And so I need to get in there and do another picking. But yeah, lots of tomatillos this year. And then all the cherry tomatoes. My plants have not been quite as big. Usually by this time of year, everything out here is as tall as what you see there in the middle. So I'm not quite sure what that's been about. Probably soil. But the cherry tomatoes have been fantastic. And at this point, I've got more than I've been able to sell. So we've done quite well. And again, in that July video, I go through every variety that I have out here. So I'm not going to do that again. But those orange ones are fantastic. That one is called Sun Orange. It's a seed from Osborne. This is just because I can see them in here, that's the dog nose Calabrian pepper. And they're hotter than I was expecting. I obviously completely missed picking that when I picked these other ones the other day. They're hotter than I was thinking. They're about twice as hot as a jalapeno. So pretty darn spicy. Spicier than I was anticipating. But I'm going to play with those in spice mixes and dry a bunch of them. So yeah, more cherry tomatoes. I had tons of cherry tomatoes this year. I think I did 9 varieties. And then this is, we're getting into the slicers. I do the smaller slicers together. And so this is Brandywine, Mortgage Lifter, and one called Canner Whole. And Canner Whole is a variety from Seed Savers Exchange that I really, really like. Some orange Valencias. We did do a big pick out here. Let's see, today is Thursday. We picked everything that was out here on Sunday. So there's not a ton of ripe ones right now because we picked most of them. We had another heat wave. Tomatoes don't set fruit when it's really hot. And so we've had that kind of off and on all season where they set fruit and then that fruit gets ripe and then they set another batch and that fruit gets ripe. So things have been kind of coming in waves rather than continuous because we keep getting hot weather. There's some lovely blooms still coming. This is about the time of year when I start cutting off the tops of plants or big arms of plants that are sticking way out into the aisles because I'm past the point where I want to save every single tomato that I get. I did have 2 varieties. I bought seed from Michigan Gardener, M.I. Gardner, and they were not what they were supposed to be. This one was supposed to be Aunt Ruby's German Green, and then there's one down there that was supposed to be Japanese Trifle. They are both incorrect. I took photographs, I contacted the company, let them know, and these were like $2 seed packs, so no big loss in terms of financials. They did refund me the money on those, but the ongoing, never-ending distribution seed mix-up is still happening. The tail end of this row is all San Marzanos of different varieties. There's a very nice example of San Marzano Redorta in there. These plants always look terrible, but they're fairly productive. I am having quite a bit of blossom end rot on this year, and I'm not sure why. This plant doesn't usually get quite as much blossom end rot as I've seen this year. But I mostly just cut that part off and I still can the fruit. And then this is San Marzano 2 from Johnny's. And I have gotten lots and lots and lots. These have been wildly productive. I don't like the fruit as well because it's not as large. And if you're canning and having to hand peel stuff, I prefer things to be a little bit bigger. But very, very productive plants, so I recommend them for that reason alone. And that is it. And I still have shade cloth up on the south side of these tomatoes. I could take this down at this point. We are probably not going to get back into more than the 80s for the rest of the year. So it's time to take that shade cloth down. But that does help a lot. This is the south side, and so the south side sun is beating on those. It really does make a difference in terms of productivity to give those plants some shade. And so I invested in this giant shade cloth a couple of years ago, and I don't regret it. So there you have it. That is the beginning of September garden. I can't believe that we are already through August. I'm thrilled to be through August. August is an insanely busy, hard work, very hot weather month. And so I am happy to be done with August and moving into fall, which is by far my favorite season. So thank you so much for joining me for this 4th garden tour of the season, and we'll see you guys back here in October for the last one.